The phone buzzed against the nightstand at 2 in the morning, and I almost didn't look. Almost, but something about the way it lit up the ceiling in that quick, guilty flash made my stomach turn before my brain even caught up. Daniel was breathing slow beside me, dead asleep, or pretending to be. I reached over him, careful, quiet, and turned the screen toward me. Rachel, just her name, glowing in the dark like it belonged there. Miss you today. Meetings were boring without you. Can't stop thinking about last night. I read it twice. Then a third time, like the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. Last night we'd been at his sister's birthday dinner. Together. The whole evening. So what night was she talking about? My hands were shaking before I even understood why. I set the phone back down exactly where it had been, screen facing up, cord still looped the same way, and I lay back against my pillow and stared at the ceiling until the sun came up. 3 months. That's how long until the wedding. Save the dates already mailed. Deposit already paid on the venue. My mother already crying happy tears every time she looked at my dress hanging in the closet. 3 months, and I was lying next to a man I suddenly wasn't sure I knew at all. When his alarm went off, he stretched, kissed my shoulder like it was any other Tuesday, and said, "Morning, beautiful." I smiled. I don't know how I managed it, but I did. "Sleep okay?" he asked, already reaching for his phone. "Fine," I said. "You?" "Like a rock." He didn't even glance at the screen. Just tucked it into his pocket and headed for the shower. I sat there in the quiet, listening to the water running, and I thought, either he doesn't know what's on that phone, or he's gotten very, very good at pretending. I told myself there had to be an explanation. People say things that sound worse out of context. Maybe last night meant something from weeks ago. Maybe it was a joke between coworkers. Maybe I was about to ruin something beautiful over one text message that meant absolutely nothing. That's the thing about doubt. It doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in, slow, quiet, convincing you that you're the one overreacting. So I didn't say anything. Not that day. Not the next, but I started noticing things I'd trained myself not to notice before. The way his phone was always face down now, even at dinner. The way he'd take calls out on the balcony, sliding the door shut behind him, laughing low, like it was a private joke. He didn't want me overhearing the punchline to Rachel Hendricks. I knew the name. His coworker. They handled accounts together, traveled sometimes, sat in on client calls that ran late. I'd met her exactly once, at his company holiday party, 2 years back. Pretty in a sharp, polished way, laughed at everything he said a little too easily. I remembered thinking, at the time, nothing of it. She was just his coworker. Everyone has a coworker they get along with, but 2 years is a long time for a coworker to still be texting you at 2 in the morning about missing you. I started paying attention the way you do when you already suspect the answer but you're terrified to confirm it. I noticed he started working later. Not by an hour. By 3, sometimes 4. I noticed he'd stopped inviting me to his office happy hours, the ones I used to go to every other month, where I'd sip a glass of wine and listen to people talk about quarterly projections I didn't understand but nodded along to anyway. "You'd be bored," he told me when I asked about the last one. "It's just work stuff. Numbers. You'd hate it." I used to believe that. Now I wondered if he just didn't want me there. One night, about 2 weeks after that first text, I woke up around 1:30 and he wasn't in bed. I lay there for a minute, listening. I could hear his voice, low, coming from downstairs. Not angry. Not stressed. Warm. The kind of voice you use with someone you like talking to. I crept to the top of the stairs, and through the gap in the door, I heard him say, I know. It's complicated right now. Give me some time." Give him time for what? I went back to bed before he caught me listening. When he came up 10 minutes later, I pretended to be asleep, and he slid in beside me like nothing had happened at all. The next morning I asked him, casually, who he'd been talking to so late. "Client emergency," he said, not even looking up from his coffee. "You know how it gets before quarter end." I wanted so badly to believe him. I think some small, desperate part of me did believe him, because believing the alternative meant everything I'd built for the last 2 years was standing on cracked glass. But 3 days later, his phone buzzed again while he was in the shower, and this time I didn't hesitate. I know how that sounds. I know what people say about going through someone's phone. But you have to understand, by that point, this wasn't suspicion anymore. This was survival instinct. I didn't even need his passcode. The message showed right there on the lock screen. You looked so stressed today. Wish I could have done something to help you relax. My throat went tight. I stood there in our bedroom, holding his phone like it might explode in my hand, and I thought about the wedding dress hanging 3 feet away from me in a garment bag, protected in plastic, waiting for a day that suddenly felt like a lie I hadn't agreed to tell. I heard the shower shut off. I put the phone back exactly where it was and walked out before he could see my face. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay next to him, listening to him breathe, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront him with a feeling. I was going to confront him with proof. Because I already knew, in my bones, that if I brought this up with nothing but a bad feeling, he'd talk his way around it, and I'd end up apologizing to him for doubting his loyalty. So I waited. And I watched. And for the next week, I became someone I didn't recognize, someone quiet and careful, cataloging every late text, every closed door, every time he stepped outside to take a call he didn't want me hearing. By the end of that week, I had 4 screenshots. Not proof of anything physical. But proof of something. An intimacy that didn't belong to me anymore. Inside jokes I wasn't part of. A closeness that had clearly been built brick by brick, late night by late night, while I slept 3 feet away, trusting him completely. I decided I needed more than screenshots off a lock screen. I needed to know what I was actually dealing with. So on a Thursday, when he told me he had a work dinner running late, I did something I never thought I'd do. I drove to the restaurant he said he'd be at, told myself I just wanted to see for myself, wanted to prove my own paranoia wrong. His car wasn't in the lot. I sat there for 20 minutes, engine off, hands frozen on the steering wheel, feeling something cold settle into my chest that I couldn't shake loose. Around 8:30, I got a text from him. Running later than expected, don't wait up. I typed back, no problem, love you, and then I sat in that parking lot and cried until my mascara ran down my cheeks in black streaks, because I finally understood. He wasn't at that restaurant. He'd never been planning to be. I drove home before he could catch me there, and when he walked in at 11:15 smelling faintly like a different restaurant's garlic and wine, I asked him how dinner was. Good, he said. Long day, though. Client wouldn't stop. I nodded and went to bed and lay awake until 4 in the morning, staring at a man I no longer trusted, sleeping soundly beside me like he had nothing at all to hide. The next morning, I did something that changed everything. I looked up Rachel Hendricks online, really looked, not just a passive scroll through a profile picture. And that's when I found the first real crack in the story I thought I knew. Rachel didn't just work with Daniel now. She'd worked with him before, 5 years ago, at a different company, before I'd even met him. There were photos, old ones, buried deep in her profile. The two of them at some office party, standing close, her hand resting on his arm in a way that told me this wasn't some fresh workplace flirtation. This had roots. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, feeling the floor tilt slightly beneath me, and I thought about every time he'd mentioned Rachel over the past 2 years, casual, offhand, like she was nobody. My work wife, he used to joke. I used to laugh along with it. I wasn't laughing anymore. I found an old comment on one of her posts, from years back, before I knew him. It was from Daniel. Miss working with you. Nobody gets my humor like you do. Nobody gets my humor like you do. I read that line until it stopped looking like words and just felt like a hole opening up in my chest. That night, I didn't confront him. I know that probably sounds strange, considering what I'd just found. But something in me needed one more piece before I let this become real. Because once I said it out loud, there was no taking it back. The wedding, the invitations already sent, the deposits already paid, all of it would come crashing down the second I opened my mouth. So instead, I did something I'm not proud of, but I don't regret it either. I set up a fake email account. Told myself it was for online shopping, something harmless. Then I used it to send Rachel a message from a name she wouldn't recognize, posing as someone doing a reference check for a mutual professional connection, asking generally about her working relationship with Daniel over the years. It was a stretch. I knew it was a stretch. But 3 days later, she replied, warm, professional, glowing about what a great partner he was to work with, how they'd reconnected at his new company after losing touch years ago, and it had been like no time had passed at all. Reconnected. Like no time had passed at all. That was the moment I understood this wasn't a 2-month text message problem. This was something that had been simmering long before I ever noticed a single late-night buzz on his nightstand. I sat with that knowledge for 4 days before I said a single word to him. 4 days of smiling at dinner. 4 days of him kissing me goodnight like nothing was wrong. 4 days of me quietly gathering every piece of evidence I could find, screenshots, timestamps, that old comment, the parking lot, the lie about the restaurant, until I had something too solid for him to talk his way around. On the 5th night, I sat him down at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd planned our seating chart just 2 weeks earlier, and I placed my phone in front of him, screen up, the message from Rachel glowing between us. "Who is this from?" I said. Not a question. A statement daring him to lie. His face did something I'll never forget. It didn't panic right away. It calculated. I watched him actually think about what version of the truth he wanted to give me. "It's not what it looks like," he finally said. "Then tell me what it is," I said, because from where I'm sitting, it looks like my fiancé has been building an entire relationship with someone else while I've been picking out flowers for our wedding. He tried the usual things. "She's just a friend. We've known each other a long time. You're reading into innocent messages." Nothing happened, but I had more than one message now. I laid out the parking lot. I laid out the late-night calls. I laid out the old comment from 5 years ago. "Nobody gets my humor like you do." His face went pale. "You went through my phone," he said, like that was somehow the real crime here. "You went through our relationship," I said, "and decided I didn't need to know about it." He didn't deny it after that. Not fully. He said things had gotten complicated. He said he never meant for it to go anywhere. He said Rachel understood him in ways I didn't, that she'd been there during a hard stretch at work when I was, in his words, distracted with wedding planning and not paying attention to him. I sat there listening to him rewrite the story so that somehow I was the reason he'd let another woman into the cracks of our relationship, and something in me went very, very still. "So this is my fault," I said quietly. "Because I was busy planning the wedding you asked me to marry you for." He didn't answer that. He just looked down at the table, at the seating chart we'd started sketching out just weeks before, and for the first time, I saw something that almost looked like shame cross his face. Almost. I told him I needed time. I told him to sleep at his brother's place for a few days while I figured out what I actually wanted to do. He argued, at first, said we could fix this, said it wasn't as serious as I thought. But I'd already stopped listening to what he thought it was. I only cared about what it actually was. He left that night. And in the quiet after the door shut, I sat alone in the house we'd bought together, surrounded by wedding magazines and paint swatches for a nursery we hadn't even started, and I let myself cry in a way I hadn't allowed myself to since this whole thing started. Not because I missed him in that moment, but because I mourned the version of him I thought I'd known. Over the next week, I found out more than I ever wanted to. A mutual friend, someone who worked in the same building, mentioned, carefully, gently, that people around the office had noticed Daniel and Rachel getting close again once she transferred to his department. Nothing anyone could prove, my friend said, just something everyone quietly noticed and nobody wanted to be the one to mention. Nobody wanted to be the one to mention it. Meanwhile, I was the one still wearing his ring, still answering questions from relatives about seating arrangements and cake flavors, completely unaware that people around him had already started whispering. I decided I needed to hear it from Rachel herself. Not out of some desire for drama. I needed to know exactly what I'd been up against, because Daniel's version of events kept shifting every time I asked a new question. I messaged her directly, using my real name this time. I told her I knew about the messages, and I asked her, plainly, what exactly had been going on between her and my fiancé. She didn't respond for 2 days. When she finally did, her message was longer than I expected, and colder than I expected too. She said she and Daniel had reconnected almost a year ago when she transferred departments. She said things had, in her words, developed naturally, that he'd told her their relationship, mine and his, had been struggling for a long time, that he felt like he was marrying someone out of obligation rather than love. Obligation. I read that word maybe 6 times before it fully landed. She said he'd told her he planned to go through with the wedding for financial reasons, something about how much his parents had already invested, something about not wanting to deal with the fallout of calling it off this close to the date. She said he told her once things settled after the wedding, he'd figure out what to do about us long term. I sat with my phone in my lap, feeling like the floor had opened up beneath the floor I thought I'd already fallen through. He hadn't just been building something with her on the side. He'd been planning to marry me anyway, publicly, financially, socially, while quietly deciding what to do about the rest of his life with someone else. I wasn't a fiancé anymore in that story. I was a placeholder. A financial decision he hadn't finished making yet. I didn't cry when I read that message. I think I'd already used up whatever tears that situation deserved. Instead, I felt something colder settle in, something clearer. I called my mother that night and told her the wedding was off. She didn't ask a single question about logistics or deposits or what people would say. She just said, "Thank God you found out now instead of after," and I sat on the phone with her for 2 hours, saying almost nothing, just listening to her breathe on the other end so I wouldn't feel so completely alone. Daniel tried, over the following weeks, to fix things. He showed up at the house twice, uninvited, once with flowers, like flowers could undo what Rachel had told me in that message. He said Rachel had exaggerated things, that he never actually said any of that she was bitter because he'd finally cut things off with her after our confrontation. But by then, I didn't need his version of the story anymore. I had enough pieces from enough different directions that the picture had become impossible to unsee. I gave the ring back on a Tuesday afternoon, in the parking lot of a coffee shop we used to go to on weekends. He tried one last time, standing there with his hands in his pockets, saying, "You're really going to throw away 3 years over this?" And I remember looking at him and feeling, for the first time in weeks, something like calm. "I'm not throwing anything away," I told him. "You already did that. I'm just the one finally admitting it." I walked to my car and didn't look back, and for the first time since that 2 a.m. text lit up our bedroom ceiling, I felt like I could actually breathe. The months that followed were not easy. Canceling a wedding is its own strange kind of grief. You're not just mourning a relationship. You're mourning a future you'd already started building in your head, the version of your life you'd been picturing for years. I had to call vendors and explain, had to return gifts that had already started arriving, had to sit across from my own parents and explain, gently, why the day they'd been looking forward to wasn't happening anymore. But somewhere in the middle of all that unraveling, I found something I hadn't expected. Clarity. I started noticing how much lighter I felt without the constant, low hum of suspicion that had been living in my chest for months before I even had proof of anything. I didn't realize how much energy I'd been spending convincing myself everything was fine until I stopped having to do it. A friend of mine, a few months later, mentioned she'd heard through the grapevine that things between Daniel and Rachel hadn't worked out either. Apparently, once the affair wasn't a secret anymore, once it wasn't forbidden and complicated and exciting, it just became two people who didn't actually know how to build something honest with each other. I felt, strangely, very little satisfaction hearing that. Mostly I just felt sad for whoever came next in his life, whoever would eventually trust him the way I once had. It's been a year now since that 2 a.m. text lit up our bedroom. I still think about it sometimes, not with the same gut punch pain it used to bring, but more like the memory of surviving something dangerous. I think about how easy it would have been to talk myself out of what I saw that night, to convince myself I was overreacting, to walk down that aisle 3 months later with a smile on my face and a secret sitting quietly beside me the whole time. I think about how grateful I am that some small, stubborn part of me refused to look away. If there's anything I've learned from all of this, it's that the truth rarely announces itself all at once. It comes in small pieces: a phone turned face down, a late-night phone call behind a closed door, a name that shows up a little too often at a little too late an hour. And it's easy to explain each piece away individually. It's only when you finally let yourself look at all of them together that the real picture comes into focus. I don't regret looking. I don't regret asking the hard questions, even when I was terrified of the answers. Because the alternative was spending the rest of my life married to a lie I'd chosen not to see. These days, I'm building something new, slower this time, more careful, but honest in a way that finally feels solid under my feet. And if you're out there right now, lying awake at 2 a.m, staring at a phone that lit up in a way it shouldn't have, wondering if you're imagining things, I want you to know something. You're probably not imagining it at all.